Oh yeah, that's some of them jello, some interest in the show that.
Okay, so welcome everyone. And it's very important to understand that we should not waste any time. When we are attending this class, we should be thinking, let me understand, let me come to know as much as possible. And may whatever I learn be beneficial, Dharma that will be of benefit. We don't need to adjust the motivation every time. Actually, you know how to adjust your motivation. So please, each one of you, adjust your motivation properly so that the remainder of this activity will be beneficial. So with this in mind, we will recite Refuge, Bodhicitta, and the Ganden Lagema. So we talk a lot about adjusting the motivation, and you hear it again and again. Adjust your motivation, make sure you are influenced by bodhicitta. So there is always mention of bodhicitta. So it's important to understand the reason for that. Of course, there are many things that we can practice and they classify as dharma, such as, for example, we can make offerings, we can make prostrations, we can make circumambulations, we can do different pujas, prayers, and things like that. And all of them, they classify or they count as dharma. However, there is one thing that is the most effective in terms of removing obstacles, in terms of purifying negativity, in terms of reaching the state of Buddhahood. And that is the cultivation of the mind of bodhicitta. And the reason for that is because bodhicitta is the mind that eliminates everything that robs us of opportunity, everything that causes harm to us. So if we look at the two main things that causes harm and impede us, there are two types of grasping. One is grasping at the self-grasping, and the other one is self-cherishing. Right. So it is due to our self-cherishing that we act in a way that creates all the trouble, all the unhappiness, all the lack of success that we encounter. And even when we engage the 10 non-virtuous actions, the thing that makes us engage them is this very strong sense of self-cherishing. So if we take, for example, killing, why would you go out of your way to kill somebody else? You're doing it because of your own self-cherishing. Either you do it for the sake of property, or you do it out of jealousy or possessiveness for another person, and so forth. Why would you engage in stealing? You engage in stealing because you're having this thought that says, what I have is not enough. I would like to have more. So I am going to take it from this other person, isn't it? So to overcome all of this and to put an end to all of this, we need to develop the mind of bodhicitta. The mind of bodhicitta is the exact opposite of self-cherishing. It is the mind that aspires to reach the state of perfect and complete Buddhahood for the sake of others. So bodhicitta is the mind that cherishes others like no other. That's what it is. So it is a mind that is beneficial for all, and it puts an end to all harm. So it is important to understand why we stress bodhicitta every time we talk about adjusting the motivation. And you will see that all the lamas, whatever activity they engage, whether it is some ritual, whether it is some teaching, whether it is a blessing, whatever it is, it always begins with that verse of refuge and bodhicitta, like always bodhicitta at the beginning, because it has this incredible power that comes from cherishing others. So because we mention bodhicitta so much, meditate on bodhicitta, adjust your motivation so that you're influenced on bodhicitta, it's important to also understand why this is the case. Ultimately, we say bodhicitta is the essence of the dharma, of the practice that we do. So we are having this class, which is a presentation of mind and mental factors. So what we try to understand here is which types of mental factors are afflictions, such as the three poisons, which type of mental factors are beneficial, which are harmful, and so forth. Understanding this presentation can be very useful because you can actually see, you can, first of all, identify which mental factor has a reason, which one is operating. You can see which one is beneficial, which one is causing harm. So it's very useful for yourself in terms of making choices. Also, once you understand this presentation, you can also share it in terms of explaining it to others. So it's a very useful understanding to have. So just to clarify, when we study here minds and mental factors, it is not in order to be able to say, you know, oh, this person right now is operating under this mental factor, or they have this type of mind. We're not in a position to say this. We have not developed clairvoyance or higher perception that knows the minds of others through meditation. So it's definitely, it is not for this sake, but it is extremely beneficial because it kind of gives us the heads up. Like, you know, now I'm generating this mental factor. Now this mental factor is operating. This is useful. This is not useful, and so forth. Okay, so we have completed the first group of 5 that are the 5 omnipresent mental factors. And today we are beginning with the second group of 5 that are called the 5 object determining. They include aspiration, resolution, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. So Geshe was saying this is a group of mental factors that are actually very useful, and we employ them a lot when we engage in virtue. So you can see having the aspiration or having the concentration, developing the wisdom, you know, they definitely, when we engage in virtue, those mental factors are very useful to be active and operating. So Geshe says, please listen carefully. I will explain as best as I can. I don't know those things very well, but of course, I am following the presentation of the text, and then will be commenting according to my level of understanding to the words of the text. So please follow this presentation. Okay, so definitely those 5 object determining mental factors are very useful when we study the Dharma or when we practice the Dharma. For sure, we will need to employ them, but also you need to see how they're useful in a broader sense. So in general, when you do study or when you try to improve yourself, right, you will be engaging those 5 mental factors. So just in ordinary study, so when you go to a class, when you try to learn something new and so forth, these are very useful. So not just in strictly Dharma sense, but in the broader sense, they're very important. All right, so let's begin with the first one. The first one is aspiration. So from Kundu, the Compendium, it describes the nature of aspiration and says aspiration is the desire to act that focuses on the 6 objects and seeks its focal object. And its function is to instigate effort. Okay, so basically, we want to look at this, the function of aspiration. The function of aspiration is to act as the cause that we bring about effort. Okay, so it's something that precedes effort. And if aspiration is not there, it means effort will not be developed. Okay, so aspiration is the mind that has a desire to act. So it says, oh, I want to do this. I really want to do this. So it says it by focusing on its object, it seeks this focal object. It is seeking to achieve that, or it is seeking to develop that, isn't it? So unless you have that sense of seeking something, you will not develop effort. Effort comes because you are looking for something, you're seeking for something. And this comes from aspiration. So we say here that aspiration is the cause that gives rise to effort. And the truth is that unless you have aspiration, you will not engage a particular activity. Aspiration means, you have certain goals, you are enthusiastic about it, you like it, and therefore you go after it, isn't it? But if all of these things are lacking, you simply will not put the effort that is required in this activity. So to give you an example, when we send the kids to school, usually we give them a prep talk and we tell them about the benefits of study, like, oh, now you start going to school and you will study different subjects. And, you will learn many new things. And when you graduate, you can get a good job, or you will become a great scholar, you become very knowledgeable, and so on and so forth. So we try to highlight some future benefit results of this activity. But it is only once the kid sees the benefit for themselves and they generate the aspiration to achieve these goals, only then they become enthusiastic about their studies and engage their studies. Okay, so there is something here that we need to clarify, and classify also. We use the word effort. However, strictly speaking, if we're talking about Dharma activities, then we need to use the word enthusiastic effort. But if we're talking about not Dharma activities, like worldly, mundane activities, obviously there is some effort involved there. But the term that we use is strive. Okay, so it's different. So when we talk about Dharma, we say that aspiration is focusing on a virtuous object. So if your aspiration is for a virtuous object, then that will generate enthusiastic effort. However, we know that in everyday life, we might set different goals and work very hard. So we do strive, but it's not necessarily that we strive for virtuous activities towards virtuous goals, right? So for mundane activities, when we work hard, you can say work hard or strive. For Dharma activities, we say we have enthusiastic effort. If we look at Lamrim Chenmo, there is discussion there that says the thing that does not allow us to develop perfect concentration is the fact that we like its opposing state, that is laziness. Okay, so this is a very important sentence here because it talks about the function of laziness. And basically, laziness acts there as something that stops us from, it's the opposite of enthusiastic effort. It stops us from making the effort. There are three different types of laziness. The first one is called the laziness of being attracted to negative activities. The second one is the laziness of procrastination. And the third one is the laziness of putting yourself down. So with the first one, the laziness of being attracted to negative activities. So let's say here that there is some important practice you have to do, a Dharma activity or your study, whatever it is. So this is the main important activity that you have to do. But instead, you dedicate your time and basically you spend your time with other activities. So you are attracted to other activities and you spend the time doing those activities. So instead of studying, so let's say I have 2 hours here to do this job, but instead I'm going to watch a movie, right? So you allocate the time to another activity. The second type of laziness is the laziness of procrastination. So in this case, you are thinking, yes, I will do this activity, but tomorrow, I'll start tomorrow. Yeah, I'll start my study from tomorrow or the day after. Or I would start it after I finish whatever I'm currently doing. And let me watch this movie first. And after I finish watching the movie, then I will do the activity. So this is procrastination. The third type of laziness is the type of laziness that sort of like you put your own self down. So you lose your oomph. Okay, so you lose your enthusiasm. You dump down your enthusiasm. So you say, oh no, these practices, these studies are for other people. They're not for someone like me. I couldn't do it. It's not for me. It's too much for me. So you put yourself down, and this is a form of laziness. So you can see that there is a virtue activity that will be really meaningful to do, but due to any of these three types of laziness, you're lacking the enthusiastic effort. And if you're lacking the aspiration, you lack the aspiration. Because you lack the aspiration, you're not going to make the effort, whether it is a kid that is studying at school or whether we're talking about the Dharma activity. You can see how laziness robs you of your aspiration and diminishes, completely destroys your effort. So you can see that laziness stops us from engaging the object, engaging the activity. So if we are looking for an antidote to laziness, the first obvious thing that we can do is to consider the benefits of being successful in this activity. If you think about the benefits, and you say, oh, it would be amazing if I had this capacity. It would be amazing if I reach this state, I will be able to do this, I will be able to do that. Then obviously there is you like this, there is some fascination if you think about the benefits, and that helps you overcome a little bit, or at least it's beneficial to a certain point in terms of reducing your laziness. The real antidote that eliminates laziness is pliancy. So physical and mental pliancy. Pliancy means you have no tiredness whatsoever. So physical pliancy means physically your body will not become tired. And mental pliancy means your mind will not become tired engaging this object. But pliancy is something that it's not available to us right now, right? Pliancy is something that needs to be cultivated, and it takes quite a bit of time. So pliancy, which is the real antidote to laziness, is a long way off. What we have right now that we can employ is thinking about the benefits, because this enthuses the mind, it captivates the mind. So looking at this example of the kids who are at school and they need to study, obviously any subject that you study requires effort, it's difficult. So you need to strive, you need to work hard for that. And in order to be able to put in the hard work, you need aspiration. And for aspiration to arise properly in your mind, you need to think of the benefits. So you think of the benefits that produces or gives rise to aspiration within yourself. You aspire to achieve this, and then you put in all the effort. You do all the hard work. And by putting in the hard work, putting in the effort, you achieve the result. This is how it is, both in mundane activities and in terms of Dharma practice. So in terms of Dharma, we say that we need faith, right? But faith cannot be blind faith. Faith comes from having seen the benefits, having seen the qualities. Once you see the benefits, then you have faith in that. Also, in mundane activities, right? If you consider the benefits, if you consider, how much better off you will be as a result of this effort, of this activity, then you like it. The more you see the benefits, the more you like that resultant state. And therefore, you have this liking So liking it is having faith in it. Okay, so you can actually see that if you contemplate the benefits, if you can understand the benefits, you will generate faith. That faith will lead to aspiration. And that aspiration naturally will bring about enthusiastic effort. So then, of course, you will engage the activity, and you will engage the activity properly. So anything that you do in terms of Dharma, let's say, so such as listening, reflecting, meditating, everything will develop as it should be. Everything will flourish properly. This is why we're presenting here mental factors. If you know the function of mental factors, and if you know how to employ mental factors correctly, if you understand the order in which you employ them, the order in which they're generated, this can be of an incredible benefit. So we say for everything, in terms of our practice, it is very important that you are not mistaken in terms of the order, the stages of the practice. Don't mix it up. Everything has to happen in a certain order. And also in terms of the causes, you should have the right causes, not excessive. You don't need unnecessary additional things, and not missing any causes. So if you have these two things in place, then everything should develop as it should be. So Geshe was saying, you can see the right way for study is that the student who is studying has to come to understand the benefits of this activity. If the student herself comes to see the benefit from their side, they will develop the aspiration, and naturally they will put the effort. If the student does not see the benefits, there's no point in the teacher whacking them with a stick to make them study. It will not bring about the results, isn't it? So Geshe was saying these days in the monastery, I can say there's less and less working. When I was younger and I was studying, it was used much more. But now we understand that's not the way to make the students study. So this is why the Lama Tsongkhapa has said, so as the stages of the path have been explained, so obviously he has presented certain, stages of the practice. He says it's very important to follow the presentation of the great path breakers. So he's referring here to the previous great masters such as Nagarjuna, Sangha, and so forth. He says it's important to follow the presentation of the previous masters who have given the certain order of those things. So those things refers to the mental factors, how the mental factors are generated in our minds and how one follows the other. And he says, do not leave this to be mere words, but internalize it into your mind. So don't just read it and leave it as an external object. Bring it into your mind by thinking about it. And he says, so when you come to the point of generating the thought, this is how I should proceed, then there will be progress. So when you come to the mind of thinking, oh, okay, this is how I need to go about it. First is this, and then is this, and this is this. It means that the correct order of practice arises in your mind. It becomes clear in your mind. So he says, when this becomes clear in your mind, then you will progress. Otherwise, so if that does not arise in your mind, there will be no progression in higher paths, higher levels, and so forth. So it is very important here that we understand the correct order of those things. The first thing that we need to generate is faith. From faith will come resolution. From resolution will come aspiration. From aspiration will come enthusiastic effort. From enthusiastic effort will come concentration, and from concentration will come wisdom. So this is the advice of Lama Tsongkhapa. Follow the order, understand the order. Quite often we make the mistake of mixing up the order. It's like, I am fascinated with concentration. Let me start with concentration. Or I really want to have wisdom. I will start with wisdom from the beginning. And we try to do this and we fail. We fail because, why? Because we're not following the advice of Lama Tsongkhapa. What did he say? He said, follow the order. Are we following the order? No, we're not. So the starting point is faith. So we have to be certain about the order and say, okay, the first thing that I need to do is faith. So how do I generate faith? What are the means, the methods for generating faith? If I have faith, I will have resolution. If I have resolution, that will bring about aspiration. If I have aspiration, this will bring about enthusiastic effort. From enthusiastic effort, by relying on enthusiastic effort, I will be able to develop concentration. Now, remember, concentration is a very vast area. We spoke about it the other day, talking about calm abiding, and we say, really, we have to develop those 9 mental states. And as we progress, we will be able to develop this bliss of physical and mental pliancy. When we have the bliss of physical and mental pliancy, which, as we say, it's the proper antidote to laziness, then any meditation we do, whatever is the subject, impermanence, emptiness, whatever is the subject of meditation, that meditation will become easy. There will be no resistance. So then from this flowing meditation, you can then develop the last one, which is wisdom. Okay, so when classified, we're doing aspiration, right? They are 3 different types of aspiration. The first one is the aspiration to have contact, to come in contact. Okay, why do we have this type of aspiration? Where does this aspiration come from? It comes from having seen qualities. So, for example, there is a particular person, let's say, and due to inappropriate attention, you have been focusing on this person and all you can see is good qualities. So, of course, here you're exaggerating the qualities and all you want to do is to be in contact with that person. The second type of aspiration is the aspiration not to be separated. So we need to understand why this happens. So usually you come in contact with something with which an object, a person whose qualities you have seen, real qualities, imaginary qualities anyway, and by coming in contact with that object, you experience happiness. So now you consider that happiness to be very important, that well-being, so you don't want to be separated. The third type of aspiration is the aspiration that is seeking for future states. So you're seeking for something. So you are hoping, you say, oh, I would like to have this. If only I had that. I'm aspiring to have that. Something I don't have now, and I want to have it. So why are you seeking for those things? Again, you're seeking for those things because you have seen benefits in those states or in those achievements. You have seen certain features, unique qualities, right? So this is the thing that we say about aspiration. Aspiration does not come unless you have recognized some good qualities in that state. All right, so that is enough for aspiration. And let's continue with number 2 in our list, which is resolution. Okay, so what is resolution? Resolution is that which apprehends a predetermined object in just the way it has been determined. It functions to prevent loss of that object. Okay, So let's explain this. It says it apprehends a predetermined object in just the way it has been determined. So it means you have an object, you have analyzed the object, and you have made up your mind that it is exactly like this. The object is exactly like this. It has this and these qualities, I'm sure. Okay. So what is the function of this? So it functions to prevent loss of the object. Okay, so that it means that it apprehends an object that has already been analyzed, right? And now you have no doubt with respect to that object. So that means that even if others come and say different things to you, present things in a different way, they cannot lead you astray. Like you have made up your mind and no one can make you change your mind at this point. So this mental factor of resolution actually gives you stability. It gives you firmness. So for example, you can have resolution, firm resolution towards your Lama. It means you have seen his or her qualities and you are certain you have this resolution towards your Lama. Somebody else might come along and say, no, it's not a good Lama, it has this fault, it did this, it said that, and so on and so forth. So those things could, under certain circumstances, make you develop doubt or lead you astray, make you change your mind and so forth. But if you have stable resolution, it doesn't matter what they say, how much they say, you remain resolute that my Lama has all these good qualities. I'm not changing my mind. Okay, so to give you another example, with refuge. So for example, when we talk about teachers, there are various teachers. There are Buddhist teachers, there are non-Buddhist teachers. And when you are looking at the teachers and what they teach, you are looking at the different features, the different characteristics of those teachers, right? So in our case, in terms of objects of refuge, we have three. We have the Buddha, we have the Dharma, we have the Sangha. Once you have actually understood the special features of our teacher, Buddha Shakyamuni, once you have understood the features of Dharma, the features of Sangha, and so forth, and you have chosen those three as your objects of refuge, right? Then other people might come along and offer other teachers, other presentations, other objects of refuge, and so forth. If you remain unshaken without changing your position, without changing your mind, that's a good sign that you have firm resolution. Okay, so Geshe is saying I have given you two examples of resolution, so hopefully this is clear. So it's we have three objects of refuge, isn't it? And we go for refuge to them by understanding the features and the qualities of each one of them. By understanding the features and the qualities, we generate faith, and that faith gives rise to stable resolution. Once we have the stability of resolution, then other people cannot lead us astray, cannot make us change our mind, cannot make us change direction. So with that stable resolution, it means that whatever activities we engage in will become Dharma, they will become Buddhist Dharma, and in particular, they will become white Dharma, meaning virtuous activity. And this is the reason why the great master Shantideva in Bodhisattva's Ways of Life mentions that the Buddha has said in the sutra that resolution is the root or the basis of white activity, of virtuous activity. It means the root of our virtue comes from this resolution. Many people think that resolution means whatever, you just make up your mind about something without reason. But this is far from the truth. Resolution is actually based on faith that has come from having seen the qualities. So you have a reason, and because you have a reason, that makes your resolution stable. So why is it that we say that we need to have resolution for our lamas, our root lama, for the 3 jewels? And why is it that by having resolution, this becomes the root of all virtue? So how does it benefit? How does it increase? So, for example, if you have resolution for your lama, it means you have respect for this lama or for Buddha Shakyamuni, our teacher, isn't it? So if you have that resolution that brings about faith and respect, it means you will listen to what they say. It means you will follow their advice. So what are they telling you? They are advising you and say, do this, do not do that. So they're telling you what to abandon or what to practice. And if you act accordingly, it's not just that you will listen, but obviously you're going to implement. So if you act accordingly, you can see how your virtue will increase. If you have no faith towards your lama, obviously you're not going to listen, you're not going to follow their advice. So listening to the lama, correctly relying on the lama, as we know, is the root of the path, isn't it? That's the beginning. And it happens with resolution, having that stable resolution. And the same thing applies to the Sangha, right? When we progress, when we try to practice the path, we cannot do it on our own. We need people who will aid, who will support us. We need to rely on the Arya Sangha and their teachings and their explanations, because we need to study. But if we don't have a resolution, if we don't have faith in their qualities, we're not going to listen to their teachings. If we listen to their teachings, it means we will study, and then it means we will practice. And by practicing, we will establish virtue. So the white side, or the white dharma, or the root of virtue, is established exactly in this way. So Geshe says, this is how I interpret this point. Okay, we come to number 3 in our list. It's mindfulness. So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is the mind that does not forget a familiar object, and its function is to prevent distraction. So obviously, if you have mindfulness, it means you are staying with that familiar object instead of your mind bouncing around all over the place. So you're not distracted. Okay, so here when we talk about mindfulness, the mindfulness must have 3 features. The first one is the feature of the object, and the object, as we say, must be a familiar object. So mindfulness is engaging an object that is already familiar. You're already familiar with this object. It's not an unfamiliar new object that you have never encountered before. Okay, the second one is the feature of the aspect. The feature of the aspect is that whilst it is focusing on this familiar object, it is not forgetting it. And the third one is the feature of the function, which is to prevent distraction. So as you can see, here mindfulness with these 3 characteristics is something which is very crucial for if for example, you study. So when we study, the whole purpose is that we retain the information, we don't forget it, we keep it in the mind. So who can do this? Mindfulness, endowed with those 3 characteristics, is the one that makes sure that you can retain the information. Therefore, this type of mindfulness with the 3 characteristics is indispensable when we study, when we meditate on the path, when we try to cultivate calm abiding, and so forth. So if we look here at these characteristics of mindfulness, the first characteristic was the characteristic of the object. It must be a familiar object. So it cannot be an unfamiliar object, an object that you have never seen, heard, encountered before. right? Because the function of mindfulness is that you remember the object. In order to keep remembering, not forgetting the object, it means you must have already met the object, seen the object before, isn't it? So it's an object that you already know, and now you keep remembering it. You keep not forgetting it. So the other thing is that it might be a familiar object, but the familiar object is not arising, does not appear in your mind. If that is the case, then you have forgotten the object, right? And this is why we say mindfulness here. The function of mindfulness is so that you can remember the object, that you do not forget the object. It means the object keeps appearing in your mind. So very important thing here, very important function of mindfulness is that by relying on mindfulness, our mind gets better. So what happens is that, for example, we progress in our study, we become more knowledgeable, and our ability to retain information increases. So basically, this is the function of recollection. You increase how much you retain. You have retained in the mind. So you study one subject, you retain this. Then you study another subject, you retain this. So now you add the new information to the previous one. So there is this heaping up. You have a heap of knowledge. You accumulate, you add up. And as you add up, you increase. And this is how you come to the point of becoming a very knowledgeable person. So people say, oh, this person has done a lot of study, is very knowledgeable, amazing, amazing understanding and so forth. It all comes from the function of recollection. So we all need this recollection. So the question is there a way of cultivating it? Is there a way of increasing it? All right. So in a sense, it is. In a sense, it isn't. There isn't. So what we have to do here with recollection is go over the material again and again and again. So in a sense, it's repetition, okay? So you have something, you've studied it, you've understood it, don't leave it at that. Come back and repeat it again, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. So remember here that recollection is dealing with a familiar object. So the more times you go over it, the more familiar you become with that object. And the more familiar it means, the more stable you retain this information, the more this information stays in your mind. So Geshe says that's why we recite, we memorize and recite, and we repeat it. We repeat it many times. So this is because we increase, every time you repeat it, you increase familiarity with the mind. So as you can see, recollection is something extremely useful, especially if you study. So from those of a very young age to the old age, everybody needs recollection. The absolute bummer is that as we get older, we lose our recollection. It diminishes. So it's important to keep repeating, because if you don't use it, you lose it. So the more you repeat it, the more you use it, the more familiarity you have. So if we want to do any study, it is very important that we increase our recollection. And what is the way to increase the recollection? There's only one way, and that is repetition. Use it, reuse it, use it again. So really, it is developing familiarity. And you can see that by developing familiarity, this is how we develop wisdom. Actually, the nature of wisdom is familiarity. Wisdom comes from familiarity. So the more familiarity you develop, the more you enhance what you know, the more you enhance your understanding. Whether it is wisdom in terms of positive things or whether it is wisdom with negative things, the more familiarity you have, the stronger it gets. Whilst on the other hand, if you don't use it, if you don't keep up with familiarity, then the power declines, and that thing shrivels and becomes weaker and weaker. So your wisdom, your understanding becomes weaker, right? So this is the key factor, and you can see why when we described how we develop calm abiding, and we say you have to come to the point of refining your mind through developing those 9 mental states. And those 9 mental placements are achieved by relying on antidotes. From those antidotes, 2 are the main ones that we rely upon, which is recollection and introspection, right? So the more we rely on them, the more we refine the mind. The mind becomes better, it is enhanced. So when we develop, for example, calm abiding, we absolutely need to rely on recollection, because with this, we will be able to find and remain with our focal object. So with calm abiding, the first thing is that we are searching for the focal object. And then once we find it, we have to place the mind on it. This happens through the function of recollection. And this is what we describe as stability. And in order to have this, we need to employ this recollection that has those 3 features. Because if we do not rely on this recollection, it means that the mind, okay, I found the focal object, but then the mind will not stay. And it means I will have the opposite, which is distraction or mental excitation. With mental excitation, it means your mind is scattered all over the place. It leaves your focal object and goes somewhere else. And this is why Master Nagarjuna talks about this situation where it says, when recollection has declined, the thieves of conception arise. So the thieves of conception here is referring to the 3 poisons of attachment, of hatred, and ignorance. The thieves of conceptions will lead you astray. So obviously, they take your mind away from your chosen virtuous focal object, and they make you follow something else. So as a result of this, you will experience the suffering in the lower migrations within cyclic existence. So it says, use your recollection wisely. And here it refers to actually waking up to the fact, or remembering that if I lose my focal object, if I abandon this activity and I follow my various afflictions, I will create suffering for myself, right? So just reflect on that suffering and immediately return back into your focal object. Remember that this group of mental factors that we're doing today are called the object determining mental factors. So it means that they definitely engage their object. Their object is a focal object. And here we need that recollection to remain with that object, not to lose the object. So your recollection is best put into use in terms of your Dharma practice, to be able to recall various anecdotes and funny stories and things like that. That's not the best use of your memory and your recollection. So try to stay with this recollection of the 3 features and employ it properly. So for this reason, Bodhisattva's Ways of Life says, when introspection is not checking, the thieves of conceptions arrive. This and your recollection will also decline. So he's describing a situation here. As we say, we always need to rely upon introspection. If introspection stops checking, it means that these afflictions, they have the opportunity to operate unchecked. And also, the reason why this introspection is not working is because your recollection has declined. So he continues by saying, whatever merit you have accumulated, it will all be stolen away from you, and you will be led to the lower rebirths. So up to here, you might have made some efforts through your practice and accumulated merit, established, virtue and so forth. But all of this will be taken away from you, because here, remember, we're talking about the thieves. So they will steal all this away, and instead they will lead you to the lower rebirth. So it says, recognize the time of afflictions and restrain them with recollection accordingly. So you have to be vigilant, and you have to understand that afflictions arise at particular times, particular opportunities. So you have to fine-tune your recollection to operate at those particular times. Otherwise, if they get the opportunity, meaning if those afflictions get an opportunity, your virtue will decline and you have no chance for a good rebirth. Therefore, always restore your recollection. So it means always apply your recollection, always use your recollection. Even though you might be momentarily distracted, always come back, always use your recollection to come back to your object. So we have mentioned introspection here a few times. That's another mental factor, is the mental factor that actually checks and examines, is there affliction or not, or is this good or not? And whilst introspection does that basic examination, if you want, the recollection is the one that places or puts the mind on the object. So, for example, let's say you want to cultivate bodhicitta. First of all, you will have recollection, because with bodhicitta, we must have a special focal object, we must have a special aspect, and so forth. So recollection will remember all of those things. But as you do your meditation, introspection should also be active. It's like, am I meditating on the right thing? Has the mind engaged another object? Is this correct or not? And so forth. So the two operate together. They're actually very, very good. They complement each other. When we do any practice, also, these two are indispensable. So basically, our practice will not improve unless we rely on both of them. The first one, introspection, will be checking. Is like, am I with a virtuous object or not? Whilst recollection is the one that will be holding the mind, correctly placing the mind on that object. So you know how we have placement and analytical meditation. Definitely placement, or remaining with the object, happens with recollection. And then, of course, we alternate the placement and the analytical meditation. And this is how we progress. But unless we employ this introspection and recollection, there will be no increase. There will be no refinement of our practice. So as we say here, if we want to improve and refine our mind, definitely we need to rely upon mindfulness and introspection. Master Shantideva in Bodhisattva's Ways of Life, it says, for those who wish to guard their mind, they need recollection and introspection. So we know that the mind is not very stable, and therefore it needs to be safeguarded. So if you are someone who has decided that it's important to guard your mind, you need to rely on introspection that will check, is my mind virtuous? Do I have afflictions in my mind? Is it good? Is it bad? How is it going? And then, of course, the recollection that will then keep or place the mind in the correct object. So those who wish to guard their mind, they need to rely recollection and introspection. Therefore, I request you, by putting the palms of my hands together, cultivate those at the cost of your life. So Master Shantideva says, you absolutely need this, and I implore you to employ recollection and introspection. Okay, so we run out of time. We have not finished this group, so we will continue in our next class. But today we discuss this very important mindfulness that has the 3 features. So Geshe was saying, also we mentioned how to increase it, how to enhance it. These are very important things. So Geshe says, please, I urge you to pay attention to this. Okay, so let's conclude by doing dedication prayers. So as we know, at the beginning and the end, there are 2 activities. At the end, dedication is very important. So whatever virtue we have created, let's dedicate.